Hi, I'm James Williams and welcome back to my channel and Happy New Year. So in the last video, last year on this channel, we looked at how in Power Automate to test what the current permissions were to a particular list item in SharePoint of the logged in user. So that allowed us to check that in Power Automate and also to check using that flow in Power Apps. In this video, what I want to do is show you that you don't need a Power Automate flow or a Power App indeed to do the same thing and change the user interface in some way based on the permissions a user has to a list item. So in this video, we're going to look at how to do it just in a pure SharePoint list, and we're going to achieve that using some list formatting. So if that sounds interesting, please stick around for the video. So the first thing we're going to look at is how to actually access the value of that column we used last time that reveals all the permissions a user has to an item. And that column was called PermMask. So you might notice that in the add or remove fields option, there's no option here to add in the PermMask column. So the only way to access it is to use some list formatting to show that value in a different column. So all I've done for the purposes of this video is I've created some single line of text fields. There's no data in them at all. All these values are appearing by virtue solely of list formatting. So we'll have a look at what that formatting is today. So the first column we'll have a look at is I've just called PermMask column, and this is where I'm just showing that we can retrieve the value of the PermMask column. So if I go to format this column, I'm already in advanced view, but if you in that view already, you can just click advanced mode at the bottom and that will reveal the JSON formatting for the column. But if I just cancel that and go back in now, we'll be able to see this is the JSON I've already come up with. If you don't know anything about this, do read the Learn More Microsoft Learn article here for some examples of how to get started with SharePoint list formatting. But all I've done here, I've created a div element, and I've said that the text I want to appear within that div element is equals, and then in square brackets and starting with a $sign, PermMask. So that alone will reveal what SharePoint has stored in the PermMask column. So you can see here for this user, I'm logged in as the test user from last time. Each of these items is permission for the test user with the permissions shown here. These are the baked in SharePoint permission levels. And so you can see that in each of these values in the PermMask column, there's something different. Not always massively different, like there's not much difference here between edit and contribute. And that's that manage list property we saw last time. So we might have 1-digit difference here. But similarly to in Power Automate, it starts with 0x at the start to signify that this is binary information shown in hexadecimal format. So what we want to do is take the value in this column and see if we can examine it in order to do something else in a column using list formatting. So the first column I've created here, which uses the value of the PermMask column, I've just called permission level. And what I've tried to do here, and it's succeeded as you can see, is show the permission level that the user has to the current item. So I've done that by examining the PermMask column, and I've returned a particular value here. So if we have a look at the formatting for that column, if I go into permission level, just expand that up here because it's quite a long one because there's lots of nested conditions in this formula. But you can see it's very different at the moment anyway, and there's a huge caveat to this, which I'll get onto. This is very different to the formula we saw before in the Power Automate flow, which replaced all the hexadecimals with binary and then looked at a particular bit, and we will get onto that later. But here all I've done is a bit of maths, because the main difference here with SharePoint is SharePoint list formatting can actually turn this hexadecimal binary number into a normal number. So if you try and do any mathematical calculations with it, it treats it as if it was a number. So you know, a 1 would be a 1, a 1 0 would be a 2, and so on if you know any binary. So we can examine how this formula works, but basically we're looking here, as we did before, for the 63rd order bit in order to tell us whether the user has enumerate permissions to the list item, which means they've got the full control access to that particular list item. So have a look what's happening here. We're taking that PermMask value and we're doing some floor division. So we're dividing that value by 2 raised to the power of 63, which is the bit we're interested in, minus 1. So then we divide by that. Floor division means we get rid of any remainder. And then we use the modulo operator, which tells us after divided by this number, so in this case 2, what is the remainder? And we're checking to see if that equals 1. So is that binary bit set to 1, which means the user has that permission. And if all that comes out as true, in this case we're saying it's full control. And if not, we go on to check the next bit we're interested in. So exactly the same formula, but this time we're looking at number 5. And if that bit is set, then it's the design permissions, and so on for the same permissions we checked last time in the previous video in the Power App. So let's have a look next at how this bit of maths works to examine a particular bit in the binary data. So thinking about how we do this in base 10, so the normal way of counting for us, before we start to think about binary, which is exactly the same approach, just in base 2, how would we say access this third highest or the third order bit here? So starting at this end, this is bit 1, bit 2, bit 3, or in this case just digit 1, digit 2 and digit 3. Well, the first thing we do to get this number is we'd, following the process we saw in the formula, divide this 5-digit number by 10, because we're working in base 10 this time, to the power of, if it's the third digit we're after, 3 minus 1, which leaves 2. So 10 to the power of 2 is 100. And basically what we do when we divide by 10 in base 10 is we're moving the decimal point. So first we move it to here, and then we move it to here. So we're dividing by that number, we're moving the decimal point along. And then because we're doing floor division, we don't care about the remainder, so we can just ignore that that's there. And so then we've got 1, 2, 3 left over. So the next thing we do is divide by 10. So 123 divided by 10 is obviously 12 with a remainder of 3. So all these bits after, because we're in base 10, will be divisible by 10. So that gives us some number back. But always this number in this column will be a remainder because it's lower than 10 when we're working in base 10. So we'll use that modulo operator to find out what, when dividing by 10, this remainder is. So in this case, it's 3. So it's the same in binary. We do floor division to divide by 2 this time, raised to the power of the digit we want, minus 1. That gets rid of these numbers. And then we divide by 2 because we're in base 2. That gives us an answer for these numbers here. But this number will always be 0 or 1, which is not divisible by 2. So that's the remainder. So using the modulo operator, dividing by 2 and seeing what that remainder is, that gives us the value of this bit. So we check whether this bit is equal to 1. If it is, it has that permission associated with it. And if not, then the user doesn't have the permission for that list item. So the next thing you might say is, well, what if I want to show something in the SharePoint list in a column using list formatting based on whether or not the user has edit access to a particular item? As in, can they change that particular list item? Not that they have the edit permission level. So the lowest built-in permission level that lets you edit an item in a SharePoint list is contribute in SharePoint Online. And the bit we check is the third order bit in order to determine that. So that's the edit items permission. So you might say, well, I'll just use this bit of the formula to say if divided by 2 raised to the power of 3 minus 1 modulo 2, if that bit's equal 1, then I definitely have edit access to that list item. But it turns out there's a problem with that approach, which I'll get onto now. So the problem is this: if we have a look at using the power approach, and I look at the formatting for this column, so this is the formula I just described, where we're checking the third order bit to see if the user has edit items permission. But bizarrely, that's turning up false in the full control permission level, which definitely has the edit items permission. Whereas you can see for the other rows, the value we expect is returned. So it's true for design, for edit, for contribute, and then read in restricted view only. So no edit items permission for the user there. It's false. So it works except for this full control one. And we can see why that's happening. And to see that, I've added a few extra helper columns here. So the first one is this PermMask value, where I've just taken the PermMask column and I've multiplied it by 1. So I've essentially turned it into a number. You could use the number function for this. And the other column I've added is PermMask binary, which I'll come on to. But this is the approach we used last time to replace all the hexadecimals with their binary equivalents. And later on, I'll show you again how to look into a particular digit. But we can see for the permission levels in SharePoint what these values start to look like. So using the replace all approach with the full control permission, you can see this is the longest string here, and it ends with a few ones. So because it ends in a 1, the number itself should end in a 1, or at least be odd. But we can see in the value column, we've got a very high number, but it ends with a couple of noughts, which is not correct, because if that ends in a naught, the final binary digit should also be a naught. So it looks like there's a problem here with the number of, with the precision basically, so the number of significant digits that SharePoint can deal with in a number. So once it gets to this point, it's just losing any information about the number except what power of 10 it is. So we're losing some key information here. So the problem with testing for one of these low order bits, so it was bit number 3 if you remember, when we've got a huge number coming back from the PermMask column, is that we can't do it. It wasn't a problem for this, because for full control we were testing for bit number 63, which will be right at this end. So there's an issue using the power approach where we're checking for a low order bit where we might get a very high number back. So in order to get around that, we're going to use the replace string approach, and I'll show you how I've done that in this next column. So first of all, how do we replace the PermMask column value with its binary string equivalent? So similar to last time, we take a substring of the PermMask column. So we take the first 2 characters off essentially. So substring works slightly differently in SharePoint list formatting. So we give it a start and finish index in terms of the digits in the string, the characters in the string. So we miss out the first 2, and I've put a number here higher than the possible length of the string. So that's this string here. So we're missing off 0x, and we're getting just the hex digits that we're interested in. And then we take that result and we replace all instances of 0 with its binary equivalent, so 4 zeros, replace all the 1s with 0, 0, 0, 1, and so on for all the rest of the hexadecimals. Replace it with their binary equivalents all the way up to F, which represents 4 ones. So that's done with a whole array of replace all. So it's not replace in SharePoint list formatting, it's replace all if you want to replace all the occurrences. I've changed my approach slightly to last time, so I've gone for just replacing the 0s and 1s straight away, and then replacing the other characters after that. So as long as you do it in this order, it'll work fine. So that gives us this long binary string. And then the next thing in the next column, which I've called edit button here, to show how we might use this information. The same formula here, but I've wrapped it in a substring function. So this time the substring is examining the length of the incoming string. And to do that, we've used split on the PermMask column with an empty string as the delimiter. So that splits the PermMask value into all its individual characters in an array, and we get the length of that using length. And obviously we take away 2 because we don't want that 0x at the start. So that gives us the length of the hexadecimal string. We times that by 4 because each one of those hexadecimals represents 4 binary digits. And then we take away a number. So this number is the bit we're interested in. So in this case it was 3 for edit items. So that's the start index, and then the end index is exactly the same, except after the function we've added a 1. So that basically says leave the bit we're interested in and exclude everything after it. So that's the substring function that returns a 0 or a 1 in a string based on the digit we're inspecting, and then the condition we're checking is 0 less than that returned bit. So if 0 is less than, that basically converts that bit into a Boolean true or false. So if we have that bit and it's true, it's a 1. So 0 is less than it. This all returns true. And when you use true inside an if, you get the first output. So in this case, it's going to be visible, and the else value. So if it's a 0 that's returned in the bit, we're choosing hidden here. And what this property is doing is it's setting the visibility attribute of the element. I've used the button type element. So this is basically saying, is this button visible? And if it is, because a user has edit permissions, the user will be able to see and click on the button. So I've just set the text to edit this item, and what the button does is a custom row action, which is edit the properties. Obviously, a user without rights to edit properties in SharePoint can't edit the properties anyway. So it might make sense to use this function, this formula, to set this button to only show where a user can actually edit the properties. So here with full control, I can click and that will bring up the item for editing. If I click here, because the button's invisible, it doesn't do anything. The button's not available to me. So there you have it, 2 different approaches on how to read a value from the PermMask column in a SharePoint list using SharePoint list formatting. One with the big caveat, which is where you've got full control access to a list item, you can't check for some of those lower order, which unfortunately are the more interesting bits, because they're just simply not in that number. Whereas if you convert it into a string of binary digits, then you can inspect any one of these. So in this example, we're checking this third from the end to see if a user has the edit items permission, and we've shown how to do something with list formatting if you've tested that value. So if you enjoyed this video, please drop a like and consider subscribing to the channel. And all that leaves for me to say is thank you so much for watching, and see you later.